A little girl vanished at a county fair, but 6 months later, a stranger walks into a police station holding her hand. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The cotton candy was half eaten, its pink fluff dissolving in the afternoon rain. Jessica Thompson stared at it, her fingers trembling as she clutched the paper cone. It had been Emily's favorite treat, strawberry-flavored, spun into a cloud that her 6-year-old daughter would tear into with gleeful abandon, pink sugar coating her lips and cheeks. Emily Thompson. If anyone has seen Emily Thompson, please contact Park Security immediately. The mechanical voice boomed through the fairground speakers for what seemed like the 100th time, each announcement driving the knife deeper into Jessica's chest. 3 hours. It had been 3 hours since she'd let go of Emily's hand. Jess. Mark's voice broke through her trance. Her husband's face was pale, his normally confident posture reduced to a slouch of desperation. They're organizing another search party, eastern section of the park near the petting zoo. Jessica nodded mechanically, but couldn't bring herself to discard the cotton candy. It was evidence, proof that Emily had been here, had existed in this space just hours before. If she threw it away, would that be giving up? She was right here, Jessica whispered. Right here, Mark. The day had started perfectly. Emily had bounced between them as they'd entered the county fair, her pigtails bobbing with each excited hop, her green dress swirling around her knees. Carousel first, she'd insisted, tugging them toward the antique merry-go-round that dominated the fairground center. Mark had lifted her onto a white horse with a golden mane, and they'd waved to Jessica with each rotation, their matching smiles a snapshot of happiness. They'd taken photos at the cutout boards, Emily's face appearing through a hole where a cartoon cow's head should be, all three of them laughing at the ridiculous sight. They'd visited the arts and crafts tent, where Emily had made a beaded bracelet that now sat heavy in Jessica's pocket. Then had come the fateful moment. "Mommy, can I have cotton candy? The pink kind?" Emily had pointed to the vendor, her blue eyes wide with anticipation. The line was short, just 2 people ahead of them. "Of course, sweetie." Jessica had smiled, leading her daughter to the stall. When it was their turn, she'd released Emily's hand for just a moment, just long enough to open her wallet and count out the correct change. "1 strawberry cotton candy, please." She'd handed over the money, accepted the spun sugar confection, turned around with a smile to give it to her daughter, and found empty space where Emily had stood seconds before. The first minute was confusion. Jessica had spun in a circle, expecting to see Emily distracted by a nearby attraction. Emily, honey, where'd you go?" The second minute was concern. Jessica had moved a few steps in each direction, scanning the crowd for a glimpse of a green dress, calling Emily's name louder. The third minute was the beginning of panic. "Mark," she'd called into her phone. "Emily wandered off by the cotton candy stand. I can't see her." By the 5th minute, Mark had arrived, breathless from running across the fairground. "She's not here?" "No, I just let go of her hand for a second to pay." By the 10th minute, they'd notified Park Security. By the 20th, the announcements had begun. By the 30th, police had arrived. Now, 3 hours later, the fairground had been transformed. What had been a place of joy and laughter was now a grid being methodically searched by officers and volunteers. The rain that had begun as a drizzle was steadily increasing, and Jessica couldn't help but think of Emily out there somewhere, getting wet, getting cold. Unless she wasn't outside it all. "Mrs. Thompson?" A police officer approached, her notebook already open. "I need to ask you a few more questions, if that's all right." Jessica nodded numbly. "You said you were at the cotton candy stand when she disappeared. Did you notice anyone suspicious hanging around? Anyone who might have been watching you? Or your daughter?" Jessica closed her eyes, trying to recall. There had been so many people, Families just like theirs enjoying the annual county fair? No, I don't think so. And Emily was wearing a green dress, correct? Any other distinguishing features we should tell our officers about? Her bracelet, Jessica whispered, fingers touching her pocket. She made a blue beaded bracelet earlier today. She was so proud of it. Her voice cracked. And her shoes. They light up when she walks. Pink sneakers with lights. The officer nodded, writing it down. And did Emily know what to do if she got lost? Did you have a meeting point established? Jessica felt a wave of guilt wash over her. They'd talked about it, hadn't they? Stay where you are if you get lost. Find a mommy with children. Look for a police officer. But had they specifically discussed it today? She couldn't remember. We've talked about it before, she said quietly. Mark returned, accompanied by a man in plain clothes who introduced himself as Detective Collins. His face was serious but kind as he explained the protocols they were following. We've shut down all exits, and we're checking everyone leaving the premises. We've got officers reviewing security camera footage, though the coverage isn't complete throughout the park. She has to be here somewhere, Mark insisted, running a hand through his damp hair. She wouldn't just wander off. She knows better. Detective Collins nodded sympathetically. Most missing children are found within the first few hours. We're doing everything we can. But as daylight began to fade and the rain intensified, the fairground emptied of regular visitors, leaving only search parties with flashlights cutting through the gathering darkness. The cotton candy had dissolved into a sticky mess in Jessica's hand, but she still couldn't bring herself to let it go. A group of strangers had formed a human chain, combing through a wooded area at the park's edge. Jessica watched them, these people who had never met her daughter, sacrificing their evening to help find her. Their kindness should have been comforting, but it only underscored the gravity of the situation. You should sit down, Mark said, guiding her to a bench. You haven't rested since. He didn't finish the sentence. Jessica allowed herself to be led, her legs suddenly acknowledging hours of standing and walking. The bench was wet from the rain, but she hardly noticed. Mark sat beside her, putting his arm around her shoulders, and for a brief moment, she leaned into him, drawing from his warmth. She's smart, Jessica whispered. She's so smart, Mark. Remember how she memorized our phone number? She can recite it perfectly. Mark nodded, his jaw tight with the effort of containing his emotions. She'll be found. She has to be. A flash of lightning illuminated the park, followed by a rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the very ground. Jessica thought of Emily's fear of thunderstorms, how she would climb into their bed during the worst of them, nestling between her parents for safety. Where was she seeking safety now? Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, Detective Collins approached, his expression grave. He was accompanied by another officer, this one in uniform. I'm afraid we've completed our initial sweep of the entire park, including all buildings, facilities, and surrounding areas. Jessica felt her heart constrict. And? There's no sign of Emily. We've found no witnesses who remember seeing her after she was separated from you. And unfortunately, there are no security cameras in the immediate area of the cotton candy stand. Mark stood up. So what are you saying? She couldn't have just vanished. We're expanding our search beyond the fairground, Collins explained. We've already issued an Amber Alert with Emily's description and photo. Every law enforcement agency in the state will be looking for her. You think someone took her, Jessica said. It wasn't a question. Collins hesitated. We're exploring all possibilities. Child abduction is one of them. The cotton candy cone finally slipped from Jessica's fingers, landing in a pink puddle at her feet. She stared at it, watching as the rain washed away the last traces of sugar, carrying them into a nearby drain. We'd like you both to come to the station, the uniformed officer said. We'll need more detailed information, and it would be helpful to have recent photos of Emily to distribute. Mark nodded, helping Jessica to her feet. She moved like a sleepwalker, her mind unable to process that they were leaving the fairground without Emily. How could they go? What if she came back to the cotton candy stand, looking for them? As they approached the park exit, the uniformed officer turned to Jessica, his expression shifting subtly. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to ask you something, and I want you to understand that these are standard questions we have to ask in cases like this." Jessica nodded numbly. The officer looked directly at her, his eyes searching her face. "Mrs. Thompson, are you absolutely certain that at no point did you argue with your daughter or consider leaving her alone on purpose?" The question lingered in the air like poison. Jessica's shock coalesced into rage, a sudden fire that burned through her numbness. "How dare you!" She lunged toward the officer, Mark's arms quickly wrapping around her waist, holding her back. "My daughter is missing, and you're asking if I abandoned her? What kind of monster do you think I am?" The officer maintained his impassive expression. "Ma'am, we have to explore every possibility. It's standard procedure." "She's been asking everyone the same questions for hours," Mark said quietly against her ear. "Let's just go to the station." For Emily, the drive to the police station passed in silence, raindrops racing across the windows like tears. Jessica stared at the empty booster seat in the back. The small plush unicorn Emily insisted on bringing everywhere still buckled in beside it. The sight hollowed her out completely. When they finally returned home well past midnight, the silence of their house hit Jessica like a physical blow. The hallway light illuminated Emily's rain boots by the door, a small pink umbrella propped against the wall, everything waiting patiently for a child who wasn't there. Mark headed straight for their bedroom, his shoulders slumped in exhaustion. Jessica paused at Emily's door, her hand on the knob. She couldn't bring herself to turn it. Instead, she pressed her forehead against the wood, feeling the cool surface against her skin, and whispered, "I'll find you. I promise." She found Mark sitting on the edge of their bed, staring blankly at the floor. When she sat beside him, he didn't look up. "We should try to sleep," he said hoarsely. "The detective said they'd call with any developments." Jessica lay down fully clothed, not bothering with the covers. Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Emily's face, heard her voice asking for the cotton candy. The what-ifs began their relentless march through her mind. What if she'd held on tighter? What if she'd waited until after the cotton candy to check her wallet? What if they'd gone to the animal exhibit first, like Emily had initially wanted? Dawn found her in the same position, eyes fixed on the ceiling, body rigid with fear and guilt. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. The local news vans had already set up outside their home. By the time Jessica made coffee, she couldn't bring herself to drink. Detective Collins arrived with a media liaison to prepare them for their first press conference. "Keep it simple," the liaison advised, her voice gentle but professional. "Show the most recent photo of Emily. Appeal directly to anyone who might have seen her. Try to stay composed, though we understand how difficult that is." Standing before the wall of cameras and microphones 2 hours later, Jessica felt exposed and vulnerable. Mark stood beside her, one arm around her shoulders, as he held up a photo of Emily taken just last week, her front tooth missing, her smile wide and carefree. "Please," Jessica said, her voice breaking despite her determination to stay strong. "She's only 6. She's wearing a green dress and light-up sneakers. She has a beaded bracelet she made herself. If you've seen her, if you know anything at all, please contact the police." Later that afternoon, Detective Collins sat at their kitchen table, his notebook open, asking questions that probed deeper into their lives than Jessica had anticipated. "Any financial difficulties recently? Anyone who might have a grudge against your family? Any custody disputes with relatives?" Mark shook his head. "We're teachers. I teach high school physics. Jessica teaches 3rd grade. We're not wealthy, but we don't have enemies or financial troubles." "Emily is our only child," Jessica added, the present tense a deliberate choice. She's the center of our world. The days began to blur together. Volunteers gathered every morning in their driveway, accepting flyers with Emily's face printed on them, dispersing to search wooded areas, abandoned buildings, anywhere a child might be hidden. Jessica joined them daily, trudging through underbrush, calling Emily's name until her voice gave out, returning home muddied and empty-handed as darkness fell. On the fourth day, Jessica watched in disbelief as Mark put on a tie. "What are you doing?" she asked, standing in the doorway of their bedroom. "I have to go in today." He adjusted his collar, not meeting her eyes. "Midterm exams. I can't reschedule them again." "You're going to work?" The words felt sharp in her mouth. "While our daughter is missing?" Mark finally turned to face her. "What would you have me do, Jess? Sit here and stare at the walls? Walk the same search routes we've already covered a dozen times?" His voice softened. "The school's been incredibly understanding, but I can't just disappear from my responsibilities." "Emily is your responsibility." The shout tore from her throat. "How can you even think about physics exams when she's out there somewhere?" "Because I have to," Mark snapped back, his composure cracking. "Because if I don't hold on to some piece of normal life, I'll lose my mind completely." He grabbed his briefcase. "The police will call if there's news. You have my cell number. I'll be back by 4. The front door closed with a decisive click, leaving Jessica alone in the sudden silence. She sank onto the edge of the bed, burning with a sense of betrayal she couldn't fully articulate. How could he go through the motions of regular life when their world had been shattered? That evening, after Mark returned, they ate dinner in strained silence. The pasta neighbors had dropped off, sat mostly untouched on their plates. Jessica could feel the growing distance between them, a chasm opening where there had once been solid ground. "I've been thinking," Mark said finally. "Maybe we should consider a reward. Something substantial enough to motivate people who might have information." Jessica nodded mechanically. Another flyer, another search tactic, another way to feel like they were doing something when in reality they were completely helpless. After dinner, Jessica found herself drawn once again to Emily's room. This time she turned the knob. Everything was exactly as Emily had left it that morning before the fair, bed unmade, pajamas tossed on the floor, a half-completed jigsaw puzzle on the small table by the window. Jessica moved through the space like it was sacred, touching nothing, disturbing nothing. She sat on the edge of the bed, inhaling the lingering scent of Emily's strawberry shampoo on the pillow. This became her nightly ritual. While Mark watched the news downstairs, scanning for any mention of Emily, Jessica would sit in her daughter's room, sometimes talking softly to the empty air, telling Emily about the day's search, promising they wouldn't give up. As the first week turned into the second, Jessica transformed the room into a shrine of sorts. She bought fresh flowers every few days, arranging them on Emily's dresser. She wouldn't allow Mark to put away the dirty clothes in the hamper or wash the sheets. "They still smell like her," she explained when he suggested it might be time to clean up. The volunteers dwindled as days stretched into weeks. The media vans stopped coming by daily, then weekly. Detective Collins' visits became less frequent, though he assured them the investigation remained active. Jessica watched through the living room window as neighbors returned to their routines, their initial horror and sympathy gradually replaced by the uncomfortable pity reserved for an ongoing tragedy. She caught glimpses of their glances, the sad headshakes, the whispered conversations that stopped when they noticed her watching. One night, 3 weeks after the disappearance, Mark found Jessica asleep on the floor of Emily's room, clutching her daughter's teddy bear. Instead of waking her, he simply covered her with a blanket and left her there. The next morning, Jessica scrolled through her phone, a habit she'd developed, checking news sites, missing children forums, anywhere information about Emily might appear. Her fingers froze over a comment on one of the online articles about the case. Maybe the mom should have been watching her kid instead of buying cotton candy. Some people don't deserve to be parents. The words stabbed through her. She threw the phone across the room, where it hit the wall with a crack but didn't break. When Mark came downstairs, he found her sitting exactly where she'd been, staring at nothing. "Jess," he said softly, "I'm not going in today." He sat beside her on the couch. "I tried. I thought routine would help, but I can't focus. I sat in my car in the school parking lot for 20 minutes yesterday, unable to get out." Jessica looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in days. The circles under his eyes matched her own. His clothes hung loosely on his frame, and his normally well-kept hair stuck out at odd angles. He was suffering too, just differently. He squeezed her hand. "We'll get through this. Together." That evening, as they picked at another meal delivered by well-meaning friends, the shrill ring of the home phone shattered the silence. It was nearly midnight, too late for a social call, too late for anything but news. Jessica lunged for the receiver, her heart pounding. "Hello?" For a moment, there was only static on the line. Then, faint but unmistakable, a small voice whispered, "Mommy." Before Jessica could respond, the line went dead. Jessica's knuckles turned white as she gripped the receiver, the dial tone droning in her ear. It was her, Mark. It was Emily. Mark rushed to her side, his face a mixture of hope and caution. "What did she say?" "She just said, 'Mommy,' and then the call dropped." Jessica was already dialing Detective Collins's number, her fingers trembling so badly she had to restart twice. Within 30 minutes, their kitchen was filled with police officers. A technician worked on tracing the call while Detective Collins questioned Jessica. "You're absolutely certain it was Emily's voice?" he asked, his pen hovering over his notepad. "I'd know my daughter's voice anywhere," Jessica insisted. "It was her. She sounded scared, but it was definitely Emily." Mark paced behind them, his skepticism evident in his furrowed brow. "Could it have been a prank call? There have been news reports with her photo everywhere." Jessica shot him a betrayed look. "How can you even suggest that? It was our daughter." Collins raised a placating hand. "We're exploring all possibilities, Mrs. Thompson. That's our job." The technician approached with his findings. The call came from a payphone off Highway 16, about 40 miles west of here. He pointed to a map on his tablet. "It's at a rest stop. Not many surveillance cameras in that area, but we're sending officers now." "We're coming too," Jessica declared, already reaching for her coat. Collins hesitated. "It might be better if you stayed here in case there's another call." "That's my daughter out there," Jessica said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm going." The drive was tense, Jessica staring out the window at the darkness, willing the police cruisers ahead of them to drive faster. Mark sat beside her, silent and rigid. "You don't believe it was her?" Jessica said finally, not looking at him. Mark sighed. "I want to believe it, Jess. God, I want to. But we have to be prepared for the possibility that this is some cruel joke." "It wasn't a joke," she whispered fiercely. "Mothers know these things." The rest stop was lit by harsh fluorescent lights, now swarming with police officers. The payphone stood isolated near a set of vending machines, yellow crime scene tape already surrounding it. Jessica made a move toward it, but Collins gently intercepted her. "We're dusting for prints and checking for any evidence," he explained. "The security footage from the gas station across the street is being pulled now." 3 excruciating hours later, they had their answer. The grainy footage showed a figure in a hooded sweatshirt using the phone at the approximate time of the call, but the face was hidden from the camera. The height suggested an adult, not a child. "So someone called pretending to be Emily?" Mark asked, his earlier skepticism giving way to anger. "We're not ruling anything out," Collins said. "This could be someone who has information about Emily and is afraid to come forward directly. Or it could be unrelated." Jessica stared at the frozen image on the screen, the hooded figure with its back to the camera. Something about the posture, the slight tilt of the head, it was familiar in a way she couldn't articulate. "What if Emily isn't alone?" she said suddenly. "What if whoever took her forced her to make that call?" The drive home was silent, the brief flame of hope extinguished, leaving only cold ashes of disappointment. When they arrived, Jessica noticed the first pale streaks of dawn breaking across the sky. Another night without Emily, another day of uncertainty beginning. As the weeks stretched into months, the pattern of their lives settled into a grim routine. Mark returned to teaching full-time, finding some solace in the structure of his classroom. Jessica refused all suggestions to do the same, instead dedicating herself entirely to finding Emily. She joined online forums for parents of missing children, learning the terminology and statistics that no parent should ever need to know. She followed leads sent by well-meaning strangers and self-proclaimed psychics, driving to abandoned barns and secluded cabins, always returning home, empty-handed and more hollow than before. One evening, Jessica sat cross-legged on the floor of Emily's room, sorting through a stack of possible sightings sent by the detective. Each photograph showed a little girl who vaguely resembled Emily, same hair color, similar build, but none were her. Still, Jessica studied each one meticulously. Mark appeared in the doorway, his expression a mixture of concern and resignation. "Jess, it's past midnight. You need to sleep." She didn't look up. "I'll sleep when we find her." Mark stepped into the room, a rare occurrence these days, and knelt beside her. "It's been 3 months. I'm not saying we give up, but you need to take care of yourself too." Jessica finally raised her eyes to his. "How can you be so calm? How can you just go about your day teaching physics like nothing's happened?" "You think I'm calm?" Mark's voice cracked. "I see her in every child who walks into my classroom. I forget what I'm saying mid-sentence because suddenly all I can think about is whether Emily is cold or scared or—" He couldn't finish. "Or alive," Jessica completed the thought. "You can say it. It's what everyone is thinking, isn't it? That after 3 months we should be preparing for the worst?" Mark didn't answer directly. Instead, he gestured at the untouched shrine the room had become. "This isn't healthy, Jess. Living in suspended animation, waiting. It's like you're frozen in time." "And you're not frozen enough," she retorted, moving her things, suggesting we clean out her room. "It's like you're ready to move on without her." "That's not fair," Mark said quietly. "I'm trying to survive this the only way I know how." The conversation, like so many others recently, ended in stalemate, with Mark returning to their bedroom alone and Jessica remaining in Emily's room until exhaustion claimed her. The next morning, Detective Collins called with news that sent them racing to their car. A gas station attendant in a town 200 miles away had reported seeing a girl matching Emily's description with an unidentified man. He was certain enough to call it in, Collins explained over the phone. Said the girl looked worried and was wearing a pendant that caught his attention, a small, silver horse. Jessica's breath caught. Emily's birthday gift from last year, a charm she wore constantly. "We're on our way." The 3-hour drive to the small town of Millfield was the most hopeful they'd felt in months. Jessica clutched a recent photo of Emily while Mark drove, both of them running through scenarios of what they would say when they finally held their daughter again. The gas station was small, its weathered sign advertising lottery tickets and cigarettes. The manager led them to a back office, where they could review the security footage privately with Detective Collins, who had arrived before them. The grainy video showed a man filling his car at pump number 3, while a small girl waited in the passenger seat. The angle made it difficult to see her face clearly. "There," the manager pointed. "That's when I noticed the necklace. See how it catches the light?" Jessica leaned forward, squinting at the screen. The child did appear to be wearing a silver pendant, but as the camera angle shifted, revealing more of her profile. Jessica's heart sank. "It's not her," she whispered. "The nose is different, and Emily has a small birthmark near her right ear." Collins rewound the footage, zooming in as much as the poor quality would allow. "Are you certain?" Jessica nodded numbly, the brief flare of hope extinguished once again. "It's not Emily." Mark placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, but she shrugged it off, walking outside to gulp the fresh air. He followed a moment later, finding her leaning against their car, eyes closed against the bright afternoon sun. "We'll keep looking," he said softly. "There will be other leads." The drive home stretched interminably, silence filling the car like a physical presence. As they passed through miles of farmland, Jessica stared out the window, each passing field and barn a reminder of all the places Emily could be hidden, all the places they hadn't searched. "Maybe we should consider bringing in a private investigator," Mark suggested, breaking the silence. "Someone who can focus solely on Emily's case." Jessica didn't respond immediately, her thoughts still with the little girl who wasn't their daughter. "Do you think she's still alive?" she asked finally, voicing the question that haunted her constantly. "Honestly, Mark, after all this time..." Mark's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "I have to believe she is, because the alternative is unthinkable," Jessica finished. "But maybe we need to face it. Maybe we need to prepare ourselves for the possibility that she's not coming home." "Is that what you want?" Mark's voice rose sharply. "To give up, to move on?" "Of course not." Jessica turned to face him fully. "But while you're grading papers and discussing Newton's laws, I'm living and breathing this nightmare every single second. I'm the one who has to face those pitying looks at the grocery store. I'm the one who stares at her empty bed every night until I can't breathe. You think I don't suffer?" Mark's composure finally shattered. "You think teaching is some kind of escape? Every morning I have to force myself out of bed, force myself to be functional for students who expect me to care about physics when all I can think about is my daughter. But one of us has to keep going, Jess. One of us has to maintain some semblance of normal life." "For what?" Jessica demanded. "So we can pretend everything's fine? So you can avoid facing the fact that I'm the reason she's gone? That if I hadn't let go of her hand..." "Stop it!" Mark shouted, swerving the car to the shoulder of the road and braking hard. "Just stop. I have never blamed you for what happened. Never." "You don't have to," Jessica said, tears streaming down her face. "I blame myself enough for both of us." They sat in tense silence, the car idling on the roadside, surrounded by endless fields that suddenly seemed to represent the vast emptiness of their lives without Emily. "Maybe we need some time apart," Mark said finally, his voice barely audible above the engine. "Maybe we can't heal together." Jessica felt a cold wave of fear wash over her. "Are you leaving?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I just know we can't go on like this, tearing each other apart when we should be supporting each other." As Mark pulled back onto the highway, Jessica turned once more to the window, watching the landscape blur through her tears. The possibility of losing her husband, atop the agony of missing her daughter, was too much to bear. Yet she couldn't find the words to bridge the gulf between them, couldn't find a way back to the partnership they'd once had. 6 months after Emily's disappearance, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Jessica sat alone at the kitchen table sorting through another batch of potential sightings. Each false lead, each mistaken identification, had worn away her hope until only a shell remained. She barely registered the sound of the front door opening. "Jess!" Mark called, his voice carrying an unusual urgency. "Detective Collins just called. We need to go to the station right away." She looked up slowly. "Another sighting?" "No." Mark's face was unreadable, a complex mix of emotions she couldn't decipher. "A man walked into the station this morning. A stranger named Robert Miller." He took a deep breath. He was holding the hand of a little girl who looks exactly like Emily. Jessica's heart thundered in her chest as they rushed through the police station doors. The hallway seemed endless, each step simultaneously too slow and too fast. What would Emily look like after 6 months? Would she be the same little girl who'd disappeared, or had her time away changed her irrevocably? Detective Collins met them at the entrance to a small conference room, his expression cautious. "Before you go in, I need to prepare you. Emily appears physically healthy, but she's different. She's not speaking much, and she seems frightened." "Of course she's frightened," Jessica said, her voice rising. "She's been missing for 6 months. Please, let us see her." Collins nodded, opening the door. The room contained a small table with coloring books and crayons. A social worker sat quietly in one corner, and beside her was a large, bearded man with weathered skin and kind eyes. Robert Miller, Jessica presumed. But her gaze fixed immediately on the small figure sitting with her back to the door. The green sweater was unfamiliar, too large for her thin frame. The blonde hair was longer than Emily had worn it, falling past her shoulders in tangles rather than the neat bob Jessica had maintained. But when the little girl turned at the sound of the door, there was no doubt. Those were Emily's blue eyes, Emily's small nose with the light dusting of freckles, Emily's delicate chin. "Emily," Jessica breathed, already moving forward, arms outstretched. The reaction was instantaneous and devastating. Emily's eyes widened in terror. She scrambled back, nearly overturning her chair in her haste to get away, and darted behind Robert Miller's considerable bulk, peering out fearfully from behind his arm. Jessica froze mid-step, her arms still extended, the rejection of physical pain in her chest. Mark placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, though she could feel his own trembling. "Emily, honey," he said gently. "It's us, Mom and Dad." Emily pressed herself more firmly against Robert's back, her small hands clutching his flannel shirt. The bearded man looked apologetically at the stunned parents. "She's been like this since I found her," he explained in a deep, gentle voice that contrasted with his rugged appearance. "Won't say much, just that her name is Emily, and she wants to go home. But she wouldn't tell me where home is." Detective Collins gestured for everyone to take seats, maintaining a careful distance from Emily, who watched the proceedings with wary eyes. "Mr. Miller found Emily yesterday morning, wandering along Highway 43 about 60 miles north of here. He brought her to the nearest police station, where they identified her from the missing persons reports." "Highway 43? Mark asked. "That's nowhere near the fairground." "How did she get there?" "That's what we're trying to determine," Collins replied. "Mr. Miller has been extremely cooperative. His statement has been verified, and his trucking route puts him nowhere near here when Emily disappeared 6 months ago." Jessica barely heard the conversation, her eyes fixed on her daughter who was looking at her like she was a stranger, like she was something to be feared. Dr. Winters, a child psychologist who had been called in, observed the interaction carefully before speaking. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, what we're seeing here is consistent with trauma-induced dissociative amnesia. Emily has likely experienced something so distressing that her mind has created a protective barrier, blocking out certain memories, potentially including those of her life before the traumatic event." "She doesn't remember us?" Jessica's voice broke on the last word. "It's not that simple," Dr. Winters explained. "The memories are still there, but they're inaccessible to her right now. It's her mind's way of protecting her from overwhelming distress." "How do we fix it?" Mark asked, his teacher's instinct reaching for a solution, a methodology to solve the problem. "This isn't something we fix quickly," Dr. Winters said gently. "Recovery is a process. Emily needs to feel safe and secure before those barriers might begin to come down. Pushing too hard could cause further retreat." Jessica watched as Emily accepted a juice box from Robert Miller, taking small, careful sips while keeping her eyes on the adults in the room. It was such a familiar gesture. Emily had always been meticulous with drinks, afraid of spills, Yet this child watched them with the caution of a wild animal assessing predators. "Can we take her home?" Jessica asked finally. Dr. Winters nodded. "That's the recommendation. Familiar surroundings might help trigger memories, but you'll need to proceed very carefully. Don't force physical affection or ask too many questions. Let Emily set the pace of reintegration." The preparation to leave was delicate. Emily refused to approach Mark or Jessica, staying close to Robert Miller, who had spent the most time with her since finding her. "It's okay, kiddo," he assured her in his rumbling voice. "These are your folks. They've been looking for you for a long time." Emily looked up at him, uncertainty written across her face. "You said you'd help me find home," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And I did," he replied gently. "This is your real home, with your real parents." Emily's lower lip trembled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she took a small step forward, then another, until she stood halfway between Robert and her parents. It was the closest she'd come to them voluntarily. Jessica wanted desperately to reach out, to fold Emily into her arms and never let go again. Instead, she crouched down to Emily's level, keeping her hands at her sides with tremendous effort. "Would you like to come see your room?" she asked softly. "Your teddy bear, Mr. Snuggles, has been waiting for you." A flicker of something, recognition perhaps, passed through Emily's eyes at the mention of the bear, but it disappeared so quickly, Jessica wondered if she'd imagined it. The drive home was surreal. Emily sat in her booster seat, staring out the window, not speaking. Jessica kept glancing back at her, afraid that if she looked away too long, Emily might vanish again. Mark drove with careful precision, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. When they arrived home, Emily stood uncertainly in the entryway, examining everything with the careful scrutiny of a visitor in a museum. "Would you like to see your room?" Mark asked, echoing Jessica's earlier question. Emily nodded hesitantly, following them up the stairs but maintaining a careful distance. When they reached her bedroom door, Jessica pushed it open slowly. The shrine-like preservation of the room seemed suddenly excessive under Emily's cautious gaze. Jessica felt a stab of embarrassment at the wilting flowers, the untouched toys arranged just as they had been 6 months ago, the almost obsessive order she'd maintained. Emily stepped inside, her eyes moving over everything without recognition. She approached the bed where Mr. Snuggles sat propped against the pillows, reaching out a tentative hand to touch his worn fur. For a moment, she seemed on the verge of a breakthrough, her brow furrowing in concentration. Then she withdrew her hand, turning back toward the doorway. "Are you hungry?" Jessica asked, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. "We could make some macaroni and cheese. Your favorite." Emily didn't respond, but she followed them back downstairs to the kitchen. She sat at the table watching as Jessica prepared the meal, her small feet dangling without the familiar swing they'd once had. When the food was placed before her, she ate slowly, methodically, not with the enthusiastic messiness that had once characterized her mealtimes. That night, getting Emily ready for bed was an exercise in patience and restraint. She refused Jessica's help with her bath, insisting on privacy with a forceful shake of her head. When Jessica attempted to brush her hair afterward, Emily flinched away from the touch, her eyes wide with something akin to panic. "It's okay, sweetie," Jessica said, backing away. "You can brush it yourself." Emily slept in her own bed, surrounded by the familiar trappings of her earlier life, yet seeming utterly disconnected from them. Jessica and Mark took turns checking on her throughout the night, each peering through the partially open door to reassure themselves that she was really there, really home. In the early hours of the morning, Jessica found Mark sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of cold coffee before him, his face haggard in the dim light. "What happened to her, Mark?" she whispered, sliding into the chair opposite him. "Where was she all this time?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But we'll find out. The police are investigating, and Dr. Winters is coming tomorrow for Emily's first therapy session. She's afraid of me, Jessica said, voicing the pain that had been sharpest. Did you see how she pulled away when I tried to touch her? She let you help her with her pajamas, but she wouldn't even let me brush her hair. Mark reached across the table to take her hand. It's not about you, Jess. Dr. Winters said Emily's reactions are about whatever happened while she was missing. We have to be patient. The next few days established a tentative routine. Emily remained largely silent, communicating mostly through nods or head shakes. She tolerated Mark's presence more readily than Jessica's, allowing him to read to her at bedtime, though she showed no recognition of the stories that had once been her favorites. Jessica threw herself into researching trauma and amnesia, printing articles and joining online support groups for parents of traumatized children. She left Emily's favorite foods on the table, played her favorite songs, surrounded her with familiar objects, all in the hope of triggering a memory. A breakthrough came nearly a week after Emily's return. Jessica was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through Emily's medical records for Dr. Winters, when a small voice behind her said, "Home." Jessica turned slowly, afraid any sudden movement might silence Emily again. Her daughter stood in the doorway, clutching Mr. Snuggles to her chest. "Yes, sweetie," Jessica said, her heart soaring. "This is your home." Emily shook her head, her face scrunching in frustration. "No. Want to go home?" The words were a bucket of ice water over Jessica's rising hope. "This isn't home?" she asked carefully. Emily shook her head again, more emphatically. "Other home," she insisted, and then turned and walked back upstairs, leaving Jessica staring after her, the medical records forgotten. When Mark returned from the grocery store, Jessica met him at the door with Emily's declaration. His face fell as he absorbed the implication. "She remembers living somewhere else," he said quietly, setting down the bags. "With someone else." That evening, they shared this development with Dr. Winters during her visit. The psychologist observed Emily as she drew pictures at the coffee table, seemingly oblivious to the adults' conversation. "This is actually progress," Dr. Winters explained. "Emily is beginning to verbalize her experience. The more she communicates, even if it's distressing to hear, the better we can understand what happened and how to help her." She approached Emily gently, crouching beside her. "Emily, can you show me what home looks like?" Emily considered the question, then selected a red crayon and began to draw. The image that emerged was simple but distinct. A house with a pointed roof, a chimney emitting curling smoke, and a large tree beside it. It was the same scene she'd drawn days earlier at the police station. "Can you draw the people at home?" Dr. Winters asked. Emily hesitated, then picked up a black crayon. She drew two stick figures, one taller than the other, both with long hair. No faces, just blank circles for heads. Dr. Winters shared a significant look with Mark and Jessica. "Emily," she said gently, "are these people your family?" Emily nodded slowly, then pointed to the smaller figure. "Me," then to the larger one. "Mommy." Jessica felt her heart fracture at the word. The first time Emily had said it since her return, and it wasn't meant for her. Dr. Winters placed a steadying hand on her arm, a silent reminder to maintain composure. "And where is Daddy in this picture?" the psychologist asked. Emily shook her head vehemently. "No Daddy, just us." The implications of this statement hung heavily in the room. Emily had been with a woman who had convinced her she was her mother, a woman who lived in a red house with a distinctive tree. A woman who was definitely not Jessica Thompson. When the session ended and Emily had gone upstairs, Detective Collins called with news. "We've been analyzing Emily's drawings and descriptions," he explained. "There's a property that matches her description in Woodland County, about 40 miles from where Mr. Miller found her. We're obtaining a search warrant now." "We want to be there," Mark said immediately. "I'd advise against it," Collins replied. "If this is indeed where Emily was kept, it could be a crime scene. Besides, coming face to face with this place might be traumatic for you both. We're her parents, Jessica insisted. We need to see where she was, what happened to her. After some negotiation, it was agreed that Mark and Jessica would accompany the police to the property, but remain in the car until the initial sweep was complete. Emily would stay with Dr. Winters at the Thompson home. As they prepared to leave, Jessica paused in Emily's doorway. Her daughter was sitting on the floor, whispering to Mr. Snuggles in a voice too low to make out the words. Watching her, so close physically yet so far emotionally, Jessica wondered if they would ever truly get their daughter back, or if the Emily they had known was gone forever, replaced by this withdrawn, fearful child who longed for a different home. "Emily," she said softly, "we'll be back soon. Dr. Winters will stay with you." Emily looked up, her expression unreadable. "Are you going to the Red House?" she asked, surprising Jessica with the direct question. "Yes," Jessica answered carefully. "Would you like us to bring something back for you?" Emily shook her head, clutching Mr. Snuggles tighter. "Don't go in the basement," she whispered, her voice suddenly trembling. "That's where the bad things happen when you don't call her Mommy." The single word hammered in Jessica's mind all the way back from the Red House. Basement. What had happened to Emily in that basement? The details they'd discovered at the isolated cabin haunted her. Children's clothes neatly hung in a small closet, a collection of dolls arranged on a shelf, Emily's drawings taped to a refrigerator. A life constructed to seem normal, hiding horrors beneath. As they pulled into their driveway, Jessica steeled herself. Dr. Winters had warned them not to bombard Emily with questions about the basement comment. "Let her volunteer information when she's ready," she'd advised. Pushing could cause her to retreat further. Mark parked the car and turned to Jessica before they got out. "Remember what Dr. Winters said. Neutral expressions, no matter how we feel inside." Jessica nodded, though keeping her emotions contained felt like holding back a tsunami with her bare hands. Inside, they found Emily sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, carefully coloring within the lines of a picture book. Dr. Winters sat nearby, making notes. Emily glanced up as they entered, her eyes searching their faces. Jessica forced her features into what she hoped was a casual expression, fighting the urge to gather her daughter into her arms. "Did you go there?" Emily asked quietly, her crayon stilling. "Yes," Mark answered, keeping his voice even. "We saw the Red House." Emily's gaze dropped back to her coloring book. "Did you see her?" Jessica and Mark exchanged glances. "No, honey," Jessica said gently. "There was no one there now." Emily seemed to consider this, then resumed coloring with the same methodical precision she'd shown since her return. The conversation appeared to be over. Dr. Winters pulled them aside into the kitchen. "The DNA results are back from the items collected at the cabin," she informed them quietly. "There's a match to several people, including Emily. The police have identified two primary suspects from fingerprints, Sarah and Daniel Wood. They're a married couple with no children, though Sarah apparently had several miscarriages according to medical records they've accessed. So they took our daughter because they couldn't have their own." Mark's voice was tight with controlled rage. "It appears that way," Dr. Winters confirmed. "Detective Collins should be calling with more details soon, but I wanted to share some observations from my time with Emily today." She glanced toward the living room, ensuring Emily was still absorbed in her coloring. Emily mentioned "the lady" several times, presumably Sarah Wood. She described having to follow strict rules, including always calling this woman Mommy. Punishment for breaking rules apparently included time in the basement. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth. What did they do to her down there? Emily hasn't shared specifics yet, Dr. Winters said, but it seems it was primarily isolation rather than physical abuse. Being locked alone in the dark was used as a threat to ensure compliance. Jessica felt sick. her bright, talkative child who had once been afraid of the dark, forced to endure solitary confinement as punishment for not calling her kidnapper Mommy. "What about the man? Daniel?" Mark asked. "Emily told us there was no daddy at the house." "From what I can gather, he wasn't as present," Dr. Winters explained. "Emily mentioned him being away a lot, though she seems less fearful when discussing him." A soft thud from the living room interrupted their conversation. Emily had dropped her crayon and was now standing in the doorway, watching them with wary eyes. "Are you talking about me?" she asked, her voice small but challenging. Dr. Winters turned to her with a gentle smile. "Yes, Emily. I was telling your parents about our nice drawing time today." Emily didn't look convinced. She shifted from one foot to the other, then asked abruptly, "Can I have a bath?" The request, so normal yet delivered with such uncertainty, caught Jessica off guard. "Of course," she said, taking a step forward. "I can help you." "No!" Emily's reaction was immediate, her body tensing. "I can do it. I'm a big girl." Jessica froze, the rejection still fresh and painful. "Okay, sweetie. I'll just run the water for you and leave the door open a little. How about that?" Emily considered this compromise, then nodded once. As Jessica prepared the bath, adding the bubble bath that Emily had once loved, she heard Dr. Winters preparing to leave, scheduling the next day's session with Mark. The psychologist had become their lifeline, the interpreter of their daughter's new behaviors and fragmented communications. Emily appeared in the bathroom doorway, clutching clean pajamas and Mr. Snuggles. Jessica finished adjusting the water temperature and stepped back, giving Emily the space she clearly needed. "I'll be right outside if you need anything," she said, her heart aching at this new distance between them. Later that night, after Emily had fallen asleep, Detective Collins arrived with more information. Jessica and Mark sat tense and expectant on the living room sofa as he spread photographs on the coffee table. "These are Sarah and Daniel Wood," Collins explained, pointing to a couple's portrait. The woman had blonde hair like Emily's, styled in a similar bob to Jessica's own. The resemblance was unsettling. "We've established that they attended the county fair the day Emily disappeared. Several witnesses recall seeing them there, though no one specifically remembers them with Emily." "How did they know to target her?" Mark asked. "Why our daughter?" "We believe it was opportunistic," Collins said grimly. "Sarah Wood had recently suffered her 5th miscarriage. According to friends we've interviewed, she'd become increasingly desperate about having a child. Emily simply matched what Sarah wanted, a daughter with blonde hair around the right age." Jessica stared at the woman's face, trying to comprehend the mind that could steal another parent's child. "Where are they now?" "Still at large," Collins admitted. "But we have alerts out nationwide. Their credit cards were used at a gas station yesterday, about 100 miles south. We're closing in." The next morning, Mark announced that the school had extended his leave of absence for the remainder of the semester. "I need to be here," he explained as he made breakfast. "For both of you." Jessica felt a surge of gratitude. Since Emily's return, the chasm that had grown between them during her absence had begun to narrow, slightly. They were united now in their concern for Emily, in their determination to help her recover. Emily appeared in the kitchen doorway, her hair tangled from sleep. She watched Mark flipping pancakes with an expression that bordered on curiosity. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "Hungry?" Emily nodded, climbing onto a chair. Jessica set a glass of orange juice in front of her, careful not to make sudden movements or to touch her. "Would you like me to read to you after breakfast?" Mark asked. "We could try The Paper Bag Princess. You used to love that one." Something flickered in Emily's eyes, recognition perhaps. She nodded again. After breakfast, Jessica cleaned up while Mark settled with Emily on the living room sofa. The familiar storybook open between them. From the kitchen, Jessica could hear his animated reading voice. the one that had always made Emily giggle as he acted out different characters. There was no laughter now, but as Jessica peeked around the doorframe, she saw Emily leaning slightly closer to Mark than usual, her eyes fixed on the colorful illustrations. It was the first sign of genuine engagement they'd seen, and Jessica felt simultaneously hopeful and envious of the small connection. That afternoon, Detective Collins called with startling news. "Robert Miller is coming by the station today to check on Emily's progress," he informed them. "Would it be all right if he stopped by to see her afterward? He seems genuinely concerned about her well-being." Jessica's first instinct was refusal. This stranger, this truck driver who had spent just one day with Emily, had somehow earned more trust from her daughter than her own parents had in the week since her return. The thought stung deeply, but Mark surprised her by saying, "That might actually be good for Emily." She clearly felt safe with him. When Robert arrived, his large frame seeming out of place in their suburban living room, Emily's reaction was immediate and shocking. Her face lit up, with the first genuine smile they'd seen, and she moved toward him without the hesitation that characterized her interactions with them. "Hey there, kiddo," he said in his deep, gentle voice. "You doing okay?" Emily nodded, actually reaching out to touch his hand, a physical contact she had yet to initiate with either parent. "You came back," she said. "Course I did. Promised I would, didn't I?" He crouched down to her level. "Your folks taking good care of you?" Emily glanced at Mark and Jessica before nodding again, less certainly. "They say this is my real home." "It is," Robert affirmed. "These are your real mom and dad. They've been missing you something fierce." Jessica watched this exchange with a complex mixture of emotions: gratitude for Robert's support, pain at Emily's obvious comfort with him, and hope that his confirmation might help Emily accept them. "Thank you for finding her," she said, her voice thick. "For bringing her back to us." Robert nodded, his weathered face kind. "Just did what anyone would. Been thinking about her, though. Wanted to make sure she was settling in okay." As Robert prepared to leave after a brief visit, Emily's smile faded. "You're going away?" "Gotta get back on the road," he explained. "But I can visit again if your parents say it's okay." Both Mark and Jessica nodded immediately, seeing Emily's distress at his departure. "And you can call me anytime," Robert added, writing his phone number on a notepad Jessica provided. "Day or night if you need to talk." After he left, Emily retreated to her room, clutching the paper with Robert's number. Jessica found her sitting on her bed, staring at the string of digits as though they were a lifeline. "He's nice," Jessica ventured, standing in the doorway. Emily nodded without looking up. "He saved me." It was the first voluntary information she'd offered about her ordeal. Jessica stepped cautiously into the room, sitting on the very edge of the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "Can you tell me what happened?" she asked softly. "How did he save you?" Emily was quiet for so long that Jessica thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a whisper so faint, Jessica had to strain to hear, "The lady and man were fighting. They put me in the car at night. We drove a long time. Then they stopped and the man pulled me out. He said they had to go away and I should wait by the road. Someone would find me." Jessica fought to keep her voice steady. "And Robert found you?" Emily nodded. "I was scared. It was dark. He stopped his big truck and asked if I needed help." She clutched Mr. Snuggles tighter. "He didn't make me call him Daddy. He just wanted to help me find home." When Detective Collins asked gently if Emily could draw the home she mentioned, the child produced a detailed drawing of a red rural cabin with a specific tree beside it, a place no one recognized, but that Emily drew with the precision of someone who had lived there. The digital rendering of Emily's drawing dominated the large screen in Detective Collins's office. The red house with its distinctive chimney and the oddly shaped tree beside it had been enhanced, every detail magnified under the watchful eyes of the investigation team. Jessica leaned forward, studying the image as if it might speak to her, might reveal where her daughter had been kept for those 6 torturous months. We've digitized the drawing, and we're comparing it with satellite imagery from the area where Mr. Miller found Emily, Detective Collins explained, his fingers moving deftly across a keyboard. It's a rural area with numerous properties that could potentially match. Mark stood behind her, his hands resting lightly on the back of her chair. How long will this take? It's already underway. We've narrowed it down to a 50-mile radius based on Emily's account of being driven a long time before being left by the roadside. Collins clicked through several aerial photographs. These are the properties we're focusing on first. Jessica barely heard the conversation. Her mind was back home where Emily was sitting silently at the breakfast table that morning, observing her parents with that same cautious, evaluating gaze that had become so familiar since her return. There had been no smile, no chatter about dreams or plans for the day. All the ordinary morning rituals of their life before were conspicuously absent. Mrs. Thompson? Collins's voice pulled her back to the present. Does any of this look familiar to you? Jessica shook her head. I've never seen this place, but Emily draws it the same way every time, down to the crooked weather vane on the roof. She remembers it clearly. Memory is peculiar in trauma cases, Collins said thoughtfully. Some details become hyper-fixed while others blur completely. As they left the police station, Jessica's phone rang, Dr. Winters calling from their home. Emily's looking through some photo albums, she reported. It seems to be stirring something. You might want to come back soon. They found Emily cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by family photo albums. Her small fingers traced over images of herself as a toddler, birthday parties, beach vacations, all moments from before. Dr. Winters sat nearby, observing but not interfering. She found them in the bookshelf, Dr. Winters explained quietly when Jessica and Mark entered. She's been looking at them for almost an hour. Emily glanced up at her parents, her expression unreadable. She pointed to a photo of herself at age 4, standing proudly beside a sandcastle. Is that me? She asked, the question catching Jessica off guard. Yes, sweetheart. That was at Crescent Beach 2 summers ago. You built that castle all by yourself. Emily studied the photo intently. I don't remember. The simple statement contained worlds of loss. Jessica sat on the floor, careful to maintain the distance Emily seemed to need. That's okay. Maybe the memories will come back, little by little. Emily turned the page to a family portrait. Jessica, Mark, and Emily in matching blue outfits, smiling broadly at the camera. She stared at it for a long moment. You look happy. We were, Mark said, joining them on the floor. We were very happy. That evening, during her therapy session, Dr. Winters brought out a dollhouse with small, flexible figures. Sometimes it's easier to show things than to say them, she explained to Emily. Would you like to make a house like your other home? Emily considered the dollhouse, then began to arrange the furniture with careful precision. She placed a small doll figure in what appeared to be a living room, then another in a kitchen. After some hesitation, she picked up a child doll and placed it upstairs in a bedroom. Is that you? Dr. Winters asked gently. Emily nodded. And who are these other people? She pointed to the adult dolls. Emily touched the female doll. The lady. Then the male doll. The man. Did they have names? Dr. Winters pressed carefully. Emily's face clouded. She said I had to call her Mommy, or else. Or else what, Emily? Emily's hand moved to the dollhouse basement, opening the small door. She placed the child doll inside and closed the door firmly. Dark, alone, until I said it right. Jessica felt her heart constrict, imagining her daughter locked in darkness, afraid and confused. She excused herself quietly, stepping into the kitchen where she pressed her fist against her mouth to stifle a sob. Mark followed, his own eyes damp. "How could anyone do that to a child?" she whispered fiercely. Mark shook his head, unable to find words adequate to the horror. When Dr. Winters concluded the session, her expression was grave but professional. "Emily's beginning to process her experience through play. It's an important step, though a difficult one to witness." After she left, the house felt unusually quiet. Emily sat at the dinner table, eating mechanically, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. Jessica moved around the kitchen cleaning up, trying to appear normal despite the heaviness in her chest. The shrill ring of the telephone startled them all. Mark answered, his posture stiffening as he listened. "Yes, Detective. I understand. Thank you." When he hung up, his face was animated with purpose. They found a property matching Emily's drawing. They're getting a search warrant now. Late that night, after Emily was asleep, Jessica received another call, this time from Robert Miller. "Sorry to call so late," his deep voice rumbled through the line. "Just finished my route and wanted to check on the little one." Jessica found herself unexpectedly grateful for his concern. "She's doing better, I think. The police may have located the house where she was kept." "That's good news." There was a pause. "Listen, I know it's not my place, but I was thinking, Emily seemed more at ease when I was around. If it would help, I could stop by again when my route brings me back through town next week." Jessica's initial instinct was reluctance. This stranger had somehow formed a connection with Emily that she, Emily's own mother, was struggling to rebuild. But she thought of Emily's face lighting up at Robert's visit, the first genuine smile they'd seen. "That would be kind of you," she said finally. "I think she'd like that." The next morning brought unexpected progress. Emily appeared at breakfast wearing a t-shirt from her before wardrobe, a purple shirt with a unicorn that had been her favorite. She didn't comment on it, but Jessica noticed immediately. "Your unicorn shirt," she said lightly. "I always loved that one on you." Emily glanced down as if surprised by her own choice. "It's soft," she said simply. Later, as Mark sat reading a story to Emily, another routine they were carefully rebuilding, Detective Collins called with news. Jessica took the call in the kitchen, her knuckles white around the phone as she listened. "The search warrant was executed this morning," Collins reported. "The property is indeed the one Emily drew. We found evidence confirming she lived there, clothing in her size, personal items, drawings signed with her name on the refrigerator. The forensics team is processing everything now." "Did you find them?" Jessica asked, her voice tight. "The woods?" "Not yet, but we found documentation in the house, bills, employment records. We're building a complete profile. It appears Daniel Wood works in construction, taking contracts across several states. That explains why he was away a lot, as Emily mentioned." "And the woman, Sarah?" "Former preschool teacher. Lost her job about a year ago. Inappropriate attachment to students was cited in her termination papers." "Jessica, these people planned this. They observed families at the county fair, likely for years, looking for the right child." The thought made her physically ill. Had they been watched, assessed, their routine learned until the perfect moment presented itself? Had Emily been specifically targeted, or was she simply in the wrong place at the right time for a desperate woman? After hanging up, Jessica joined Mark and Emily in the living room. Emily was showing unexpected interest in the story, pointing occasionally at illustrations that seemed familiar. Jessica sat quietly, not wanting to interrupt this fragile moment of normalcy. That afternoon, Dr. Winters arrived with a newspaper tucked under her arm. She pulled Jessica and Mark aside before greeting Emily. "There's something you should know," she said in a low voice, unfolding the newspaper. "The police found these photos in the Woods house and released them to help with the search. They're in today's paper." The photograph showed the couple from Emily's drawings, Sarah Wood with her blonde hair and tight smile, Daniel Wood standing slightly behind her, his expression unreadable. They looked so ordinary, so unremarkable, not like monsters who would steal a child and lock her in darkness. "Emily hasn't seen this yet," Dr. Winters continued. "But I think we should prepare for her reaction if she does. It could trigger significant memories or emotions." They agreed to keep the newspaper out of sight, but their caution proved unnecessary. During her therapy session, as Emily worked with clay, making small sculptures that Dr. Winters encouraged her to explain, the doorbell rang. It was a neighbor dropping off a casserole, the newspaper tucked under her arm, the front page with the Woods photos clearly visible. Emily saw it from across the room. Her hands froze mid-motion, the clay squeezing between her fingers as her entire body went rigid. "Emily?" Dr. Winters said gently. "What do you see?" Emily's breathing quickened, her eyes fixed on the newspaper. "It's them," she whispered. "The lady and the man." Mark quickly thanked the neighbor and closed the door, but the damage was done. Emily had begun to tremble, her clay creation forgotten. Dr. Winters moved closer, her voice calm and steady. "Emily, you're safe here. They can't reach you anymore. Can you tell me what you're feeling right now?" For a moment it seemed Emily would retreat back into silence. Then, with a sudden rush of words that startled everyone, "She said if I ever called you Mommy and Daddy again, she would hurt you. She said you didn't want me anymore. That's why you let me go at the fair. She said I had to forget you and be her little girl instead." The words tumbled out, growing more distressed with each revelation. "When I cried for you at night, she put me in the basement until I stopped. She made me say, 'I love you, Mommy,' every night before bed, even when I was crying." Emily's face had flushed red, tears streaming down her cheeks as months of enforced silence broke. "I didn't forget you. I just had to pretend, or else they'd hurt you. I didn't forget, I didn't." During a tense therapy session, when Emily is shown photos of the Woods in a newspaper, the child begins to tremble, uncontrollably, and finally speaks in a torrent of words. "They said if I called you Mommy and Daddy, they would hurt my other Mommy and Daddy, my real ones." Emily's revelation hung in the room like a thundercloud, dark and charged with emotion. Dr. Winters moved closer, keeping her voice steady as Emily's small body shook with the force of her suppressed memories. "You didn't forget," Dr. Winters affirmed. "You were trying to protect your parents. That was very brave, Emily." Jessica stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. All this time, all these moments of rejection, of Emily pulling away, had been her daughter's attempt to protect them. Not a lack of recognition, but a fear born of manipulation and threats. She took a tentative step forward, fighting the urge to sweep Emily into her arms. "Emily," she said softly, "no one is going to hurt us. And no one is going to hurt you ever again." Emily looked up, her eyes searching Jessica's face, seeking confirmation of this promise. "The lady said she was my real mommy, that you gave me away." "That was a lie," Mark said, his voice cracking. "We never stopped looking for you. Not for one single day." Dr. Winters guided the conversation carefully, helping Emily process these complex emotions in a safe environment. By the end of the session, Emily had revealed more details about her captivity, how Sarah Wood had gradually convinced her that her real parents had abandoned her, how she'd been rewarded for calling Sarah Mommy and punished when she refused. After Emily finally fell asleep that night, exhausted from the emotional breakthrough, Jessica and Mark sat in the kitchen, still processing everything they'd learned. "She thought she was protecting us," Jessica whispered, staring into her untouched tea. "All this time I thought she didn't recognize us, didn't want us, but she was trying to keep us safe." Mark reached across the table, taking her hand. "We have her back now. That's what matters." The next morning brought a call from Detective Collins. "We've got a lead on the Woods," he reported. "Credit card activity in Newfield, about 3 hours south. We believe they're trying to make it to the Mexican border." "Will you catch them?" Jessica asked, her voice tense with urgency. "We have officers in pursuit and roadblocks set up. I'll keep you informed." Throughout the day, Jessica found herself checking the windows, half expecting to see Sarah Wood's face peering in, coming to reclaim the child she'd stolen. Emily seemed similarly on edge, startling at every noise, staying close to Mark as he tried to engage her in simple activities, a puzzle, a quiet game of cards. That evening, the call finally came. The Woods had been apprehended at a gas station 50 miles from the border, caught in the dragnet law enforcement had spread across the southern highways. "They're in custody," Collins confirmed, "being transported back now for arraignment. The district attorney is preparing multiple charges: kidnapping, child endangerment, false imprisonment." Relief flooded through Jessica, though it was quickly tempered by a new concern. "Emily will have to testify?" "Not necessarily. The physical evidence at the cabin is substantial, and with Emily's recorded statements to Dr. Winters, we may be able to spare her a court appearance." After hanging up, Jessica shared the news with Mark, both of them agreeing to tell Emily in the morning, with Dr. Winters present to help manage her reaction. But as the initial relief faded, Jessica felt something else rising within her, a burning, consuming rage. These people had stolen their daughter, manipulated and traumatized her, destroyed the innocent trust that had once defined Emily. And now they would sit in a courtroom, represented by lawyers, afforded all the rights and protections of the justice system they had so completely disregarded for a 6-year-old child. "I want to see them," she said suddenly. "I need to look them in the eyes." Mark looked at her with alarm. "Jessica, no, what good would that do?" "I need to understand," she insisted. "I need to ask her why. Why our daughter? Why she thought she had the right to destroy our family." "The police will handle the interrogation," Mark reasoned. "Our focus should be on Emily, on helping her heal." But the idea had taken root, impossible to dislodge. That night, Jessica lay awake, imagining confronting Sarah Wood, what she would say, what answers she needed. By morning, her resolve had only strengthened. When Dr. Winters arrived for Emily's session, Jessica pulled her aside. "I want to confront them, the Woods. Would that be a terrible mistake?" Dr. Winters considered the question carefully. Psychologically, there could be some closure in confronting them, but it could also re-traumatize you, complicate your healing process, and it won't change what happened. "I need to do this," Jessica insisted. "For 6 months, these people controlled our lives, without us even knowing it. I need to reclaim some of that power." Despite Mark's continued objections, Jessica arranged the visit through Detective Collins, who reluctantly agreed to facilitate a brief meeting at the county jail, where Sarah Wood was being held pending trial. Daniel would be in a separate meeting room. Collins had advised against confronting both at once. "There's no guarantee she'll talk to you," Collins warned, as he escorted Jessica through the stark hallways of the detention center. "And you need to prepare yourself. These situations rarely provide the catharsis people hope for." Jessica nodded mechanically, her heart pounding as they approached the visitor's room. Mark walked beside her, having finally agreed to accompany her despite his misgivings. Sarah Wood was already seated at the metal table when they entered, her hands cuffed before her. Without her carefully styled hair and makeup, she looked smaller, older, ordinary. Nothing like the monster Jessica had imagined. She raised her eyes as they entered, her expression shifting from wariness to a strange, unsettling smile. "I wondered if you'd come," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Emily's mother, the original." The casual way she said it, as if they were simply two women sharing custody, sent a wave of revulsion through Jessica. She sat across from Sarah, Mark's steadying hand on her shoulder. Why? The single word contained all of Jessica's anguish, rage, and incomprehension. Sarah tilted her head slightly. Have you ever wanted something so badly that you'd do anything to have it? Something that everyone else seems to get so easily, but is denied to you? Emily wasn't a thing to be taken, Mark said, his voice tight. She's a person, our daughter. She became my daughter too, Sarah replied, her eyes never leaving Jessica's. I loved her. I took care of her. Did you know she's allergic to strawberries? Did you know she talks in her sleep? She's not allergic to strawberries, Jessica said automatically. She had them all the time. Sarah shrugged. She developed it recently then. She broke out in hives when I gave her strawberry ice cream in May. The casual revelation, this woman knowing details about Emily's life that they had missed, was like a knife to Jessica's heart. 6 months of Emily's life, of changes and developments, stolen from them. You locked her in a basement, Jessica said, her voice rising. You threatened her, manipulated her, made her afraid of her own parents. That's not love. That's torture. I only did that when necessary, Sarah countered, her expression hardening. When she wouldn't accept the reality of her new life. Children need discipline, structure. You think I enjoyed hearing her cry? I did what was needed to help her adjust. Adjust to being kidnapped? Mark's incredulity was palpable. Sarah's eyes flashed. To being with a mother who was actually present, who didn't let go of her hand in a crowded fair, who made her the center of her world, not an afterthought while running errands. The accusation struck Jessica like a physical blow. You watched us. At the fair. You were waiting for a chance. I saw an opportunity, Sarah admitted without remorse. A moment of carelessness that I would never have allowed. Jessica leaned forward, rage building within her. You destroyed our lives. You traumatized an innocent child because of your own selfish desires. I gave her a good home, Sarah insisted, a strange light in her eyes. I read to her every night. I made her favorite meals. I taught her to write in cursive. I loved her better than you did. Something in Jessica snapped. She lunged across the table, her hands reaching for Sarah's throat before she was even aware of moving. Mark grabbed her, pulling her back as a guard rushed in. You're insane, Jessica shouted as Mark dragged her toward the door. Emily is ours. She will always be ours. You're nothing to her, nothing but a nightmare she'll forget. In the hallway, Mark held Jessica as she shook with rage and delayed shock. Breathe, he murmured. Just breathe. It's over. She can't hurt us anymore. But it wasn't over. The drive home passed in tense silence, Jessica replaying Sarah's words in her mind. You loved her better than you did. The accusation festered, feeding her deepest fears. Had she been careless? Had she made Emily an afterthought? At home, they found Emily napping under Dr. Winters's watchful eye. The psychologist took one look at Jessica's face and guided her to the kitchen. It didn't go well, she observed quietly. She said she loved Emily better than I did, Jessica whispered, the words burning her throat. That she was more attentive, more present. Dr. Winters shook her head firmly. That's classic manipulator behavior, taking a moment of normal human error and weaponizing it. You're a good mother, Jessica. One moment at a fair doesn't erase that. But the poison had taken root. That night, after Emily was asleep, Jessica entered her room, the shrine she had maintained for 6 months, now restored to functional use. The carefully preserved items, the wilted flowers she'd continuously replaced, the untouched toys, all of it suddenly seemed pathological rather than devotional. With a strangled cry, Jessica began tearing posters from the wall, sweeping books from shelves, pulling preserved clothing from drawers. This perfect, pristine shrine wasn't Emily's room. It was Jessica's monument to her own guilt. Mark rushed in, alarmed by the noise. Jess, what are you doing? This isn't real, she cried, gesturing wildly at the destruction around her. This Emily doesn't exist anymore. She's gone, Mark. That innocent little girl who left for the fair. She's dead. And I don't know how to love the traumatized child who came back. She collapsed to her knees among the scattered remnants of Emily's former life, unaware that a small figure stood frozen in the doorway, watching with wide, frightened eyes as her mother destroyed the last vestiges of the life they had once shared. The scream that tore from Emily's throat shattered the night. Mark spun around to see his daughter backing away from the doorway, her face contorted in terror, hands raised as if to ward off a blow. The stuffed bear she'd been clutching fell to the floor as she turned and ran. "Emily!" Mark called, rushing after her while Jessica remained frozen among the debris of her breakdown. He found Emily huddled in the corner of the guest bathroom, knees drawn to her chest, rocking back and forth. When he reached toward her, she flinched violently. "Don't hurt me," she whispered. "I'll be good. I promise I'll be good." The words gutted him. "No one's going to hurt you, sweetheart. I promise." He crouched at a safe distance, making himself smaller, less threatening. "Mom was she was upset about other things, not at you." Emily's eyes, wide with fear, darted past him toward the hallway. "She said I'm dead." The simple statement, delivered in her small, trembling voice, made Mark's heart constrict. How much had she heard? How could they possibly explain Jessica's outburst in terms a traumatized 6-year-old could understand? "That's not what she meant," he said gently. "Sometimes grown-ups say things that come out wrong when they're upset." Emily continued rocking, unconvinced. Mark remained with her, speaking softly, until her breathing steadied. When he felt it was safe, he slowly extended his hand. "Would you like to come sleep in the guest room tonight?" After a moment's hesitation, Emily placed her tiny hand in his, a gesture of trust that brought tears to his eyes. Once Emily was settled in the guest room, Mark returned to find Jessica sitting motionless amidst the chaos she'd created, staring blankly at the wall. "She thinks you want to hurt her," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Everything we've worked for, all the progress with Dr. Winters, you've just undone it all." Jessica looked up, her face tear-streaked and hollow. "I heard her scream." "Did I? Is she okay?" "No, Jessica, she's not okay." Mark ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "She's terrified. She heard you say she was dead. The Emily we knew is dead. How is she supposed to understand that?" "I didn't know she was there," Jessica whispered, though the excuse sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I think you should stay somewhere else for a few days," Mark said, the words clearly difficult for him. "My sister's, maybe. We need some time to help Emily feel safe again." "You're asking me to leave?" Jessica's voice cracked. "To leave my daughter after I just got her back? I'm asking you to give her space while you get help." Mark's tone softened slightly. "This isn't just about Emily, Jess. You're not okay either. You haven't been since the fair." Jessica wanted to argue, to insist she could control herself, that it would never happen again, but the devastation in Emily's eyes when she'd seen her, tearing apart the room, haunted her. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe she was as broken as the mementos scattered across the floor. The next morning, Emily emerged cautiously from the guest room, eyeing Jessica warily as she packed a small suitcase. Mark had explained as gently as possible that Mommy needed a few days of grown-up time to feel better, just like Emily needed special time with Dr. Winters. "I'll call every night," Jessica promised, kneeling to Emily's level but careful not to move closer than necessary. "And I'll be back very soon." Emily nodded silently, her expression guarded. She didn't ask where Jessica was going or why, and somehow that silent acceptance was worse than any questions could have been. As Jessica's car disappeared down the street, Mark closed the front door with a heavy sigh. The house felt both emptier and less tense simultaneously, a confusing contradiction that mirrored his own mixed emotions about his wife's temporary departure. "Is she gone?" Emily's voice came from behind him. Mark turned, finding his daughter clutching Mr. Snuggles tightly to her chest. "Just for a little while, sweetie. She needs to rest." Emily seemed to consider this, then asked in a small voice, "Are you going away too?" The question broke his heart. "No, I'm staying right here with you." Over the next few days, Mark threw himself into creating a routine that might help Emily feel secure. He took a full leave of absence from school, canceling the few classes he'd tentatively scheduled. Mornings began with pancakes shaped like animals, afternoons included quiet reading sessions, and evenings ended with walks around the neighborhood, simple activities that required no pressure to talk or engage beyond her comfort level. Dr. Winters continued daily sessions, gradually introducing therapeutic play that allowed Emily to process her feelings about Jessica's outburst. Using dolls, Emily enacted scenes of anger and reconciliation, working through her fear in the safe container of make-believe. "She's actually showing remarkable resilience," Dr. Winters told Mark after a particularly productive session. "This setback is significant, but not insurmountable. Children often have a greater capacity for healing than we give them credit for." "What about Jessica?" Mark asked quietly. "She started seeing a therapist, but she's so consumed by guilt. Every conversation turns into self-recrimination." Dr. Winters nodded thoughtfully. "Recovery isn't linear for any of you. Jessica experienced her own trauma, different from Emily's but profound nonetheless. Give her time." 3 days after Jessica's departure, Robert Miller called. Mark explained the situation as diplomatically as possible. "I'm coming through town tomorrow," Robert said. "If you think it might help the little one, I could stop by." Mark hesitated. His initial wariness of Robert had evolved into a complex mixture of gratitude and jealousy. Emily's face lit up whenever Robert visited in a way it didn't for her own parents. Yet the trucker's genuine concern and the undeniable positive effect his presence had on Emily made it difficult to refuse. "That would be kind of you," Mark said finally. "Emily would like that." When Robert arrived the following afternoon, Emily's reaction was immediate and jarring. Her face broke into a genuine smile, the first Mark had seen since Jessica's breakdown, and she moved toward Robert without the hesitation that characterized her interactions with everyone else. "Hey there, kiddo," Robert greeted her warmly. "How you holding up?" Emily shrugged, a gesture so normal, so childlike, that Mark felt a surge of both hope and envy. Why could she be so natural with this stranger, but not with her own father? They settled in the living room, Robert entertaining Emily with stories of the interesting sights he'd seen on his latest route. Mark brought snacks, watching their interaction with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. What was it about Robert that made Emily feel so safe? After Emily went to get a drawing she wanted to show Robert, Mark voiced the question that had been troubling him. "She's different with you, more herself. Why do you think that is?" Robert considered the question seriously. "I reckon it's because I don't have expectations. You and your wife, you remember who she was before. You're hoping to get that little girl back. I only know who she is now, so she doesn't feel she's disappointing me." The insight struck Mark with its simple truth. Perhaps Emily sensed their desperate hope for her to return to her old self, a pressure she couldn't possibly fulfill. The visit ended with a surprising request from Emily. "Can Robert come to my next doctor appointment, the one with the toys?" Mark exchanged glances with Robert, who looked equally surprised. "That's something we'd need to ask Dr. Winters about," Mark said carefully. Dr. Winters, when consulted, saw potential benefits. Emily feels safe with Mr. Miller. Including him in a therapy session might help her express things she's been hesitant to share. And so Robert joined their next session, sitting quietly as Emily worked with the dollhouse, arranging furniture and small figures with careful precision. For the first time, she created a scene in the dollhouse that resembled their current home rather than the red house where she'd been kept. As she positioned the dolls, She spoke more than she had in any previous session. "This is where I live now. With Dad." She glanced at Mark as if checking his reaction to the title, which she'd used sporadically since returning. Then she picked up another male doll and placed it carefully beside the others. "And sometimes Robert visits." "And who's this?" Dr. Winters asked gently, pointing to a female doll Emily had placed outside the dollhouse, separated from the others. Emily hesitated. "That's the other mom, the one who's away right now." Mark felt a pang at her characterization of Jessica, not as mom, but as the other mom, and the physical separation represented in the doll's placement. As the session continued, Emily began enacting a scenario where the dolls prepared a meal together. When Robert's doll character helped the child doll reach something on a high shelf, Emily looked up at the real Robert and said quietly but distinctly, "Thanks, Daddy." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Mark felt as though he'd been struck. Dr. Winters kept her expression neutral, while Robert looked stunned and uncomfortable. "Emily," he said gently, "I'm not your daddy. Mark is your dad, remember?" Emily looked confused, then embarrassed. "Sorry," she whispered, ducking her head. Dr. Winters smoothly redirected the session, but the moment had left its mark. Later, as Robert prepared to leave, he spoke privately with Mark. "I'm real sorry about that," he said, genuine dismay in his eyes. "I never encouraged her to call me that." "I know," Mark assured him, though the pain of the moment still resonated. "Dr. Winters says it's normal. She associates you with safety and rescue. We just need to keep reinforcing the truth gently." After Robert left, Mark called Jessica as he did every evening, sharing updates on Emily's day. He debated whether to mention the daddy incident, knowing it would hurt her as much as it had hurt him. In the end, he decided honesty was necessary. "She'll understand it's part of the process," Jessica said after a long pause, though her voice was thick with emotion. "Dr. Winters warned us there would be confusing attachments." "How are you doing?" Mark asked, changing the subject. "Better, I think. The therapist is helping me understand that my breakdown wasn't just about Emily. It was about my own unprocessed trauma from the months she was missing." The conversation ended with tentative plans for Jessica to return in a few days, with careful preparation for Emily and supervised by Dr. Winters. On Christmas Eve, Mark tucked Emily into bed, the guest room now temporarily transformed into her space with familiar comforts from her real bedroom. He read her favorite story, encouraged that she snuggled slightly closer than usual as he turned the pages. "Dad?" she asked as he prepared to turn out the light. "Is the other mommy coming back for Christmas?" "Yes, Mom will be here tomorrow," he confirmed. "Are you okay with that?" Emily was quiet for so long that Mark thought she might have fallen asleep. Then, in a voice so small he barely heard it, she asked, "Can I go back with the other mommy instead?" She didn't yell as much. Mark's heart stopped. Emily's innocent question echoed in the darkness of the bedroom, each word a dagger. The other mommy. Sarah Wood, the woman who had stolen their daughter, locked her in a basement, and manipulated her with fear, being compared favorably to Jessica. "What did you say?" he asked softly, hoping he'd misheard. Emily pulled the covers up to her chin, eyes wide with apprehension. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be bad." "You're not bad, Em. Never." Mark struggled to keep his voice steady. "But your mom, Jessica, she loves you very much. She's just been sad and scared because of what happened." Emily looked unconvinced. "She broke all my things. She said I was dead." The simple, devastating interpretation of Jessica's breakdown hung between them. How could he explain adult grief and trauma to a child who had endured unimaginable horrors? "She didn't mean you were dead, sweetheart. She meant she was sad about the time that was taken from us." Mark stroked her hair gently. Sometimes grown-ups say confusing things when they're hurting. Emily considered this, then whispered, The lady said mean things when she was mad too. Mark swallowed hard. Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow is Christmas. He kissed her forehead and left the room, closing the door part way. Downstairs, he collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. The comparison to Sarah Wood was unbearable. He reached for his phone to call Jessica, then stopped. Hearing this would devastate her further, especially on Christmas Eve. Instead, he dialed Dr. Winters. She asked if she could go back to Sarah Wood, he said without preamble when she answered. Because she didn't yell as much. I don't know what to do. Dr. Winters sighed. Children often idealize the absent parent or caregiver, especially in confusing situations. Emily is trying to make sense of having had two mothers, both of whom frightened her in different ways. Jessica would be destroyed if she heard this. Where is Jessica now? At her sister's. She's supposed to come home tomorrow morning for Christmas. I think you should call her tonight, Dr. Winters said gently. Not to relay Emily's exact words, but to check on her. Make sure she's in a stable place before she returns. After hanging up, Mark stood at the window, watching snow begin to fall. The Christmas lights from neighboring houses cast colorful reflections on the gathering white, a festive scene at stark odds with the turmoil inside their home. When he called Jessica, her voice sounded stronger than it had in days. How are you doing? He asked. Better, I think. Therapy is helping. And you? How's Emily? She's asleep now. It's been challenging. He couldn't bring himself to share Emily's comparison. Are you still planning to come tomorrow morning? Yes, unless you think it's too soon. No, he said, perhaps too quickly. No, I think it would be good. It's Christmas after all. After they hung up, Mark checked on Emily one last time before trying to sleep himself. His mind raced with worries about the coming day, about Jessica's fragile state, about Emily's continued healing. Sleep seemed impossible. The phone's harsh ring jolted him awake at 2 a.m. Jessica's sister's number flashed on the screen. Mark, it's Claire. Jessica's gone. He sat up, instantly alert. What do you mean, gone? We had a good evening. Talked about tomorrow, she seemed better. But when I went to check on her just now, her bed's empty. Her coat and boots are missing. Mark's mind raced. Did she take the car? No, it's still here. I don't know how she left. Call the police, Mark instructed. I need to stay with Emily, but Jessica might be... He couldn't finish the sentence. The possibilities were too frightening. I already called them. They're sending a car to look for her. After hanging up, Mark paced the living room, torn between waking Emily to drive out searching and staying put in case Jessica called. The snow was falling heavily now, the temperature dropping well below freezing. If Jessica was out there, wandering in her emotional state. His phone rang again an hour later. Detective Collins. We found her, Mark. A patrol car spotted her at the county fairgrounds sitting on a bench near the old carousel. Is she okay? She's hypothermic, not responding well. The ambulance is taking her to Memorial Hospital now. Mark called his neighbor, an elderly woman who had helped with Emily before, explaining the emergency. Within minutes, he was driving carefully through the snowstorm toward the hospital, his windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the thickening flakes. At the hospital, he was directed to the emergency department, where Jessica lay surrounded by warming blankets, her face pale as the snow outside, lips tinged with blue. A doctor was checking her vital signs. She was outside for at least 2 hours in these temperatures, the doctor explained. Her core temperature was dangerously low when she arrived. We're bringing it up slowly. Will she be okay? I believe so, but we'd like to keep her overnight for observation. Mark pulled a chair close to Jessica's bed, taking her cold hand in his. Her eyes fluttered open. I'm sorry, she whispered. I just needed to go back there to understand. The fairground? Jess, you could have frozen to death. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment, letting go of her hand. 1 second that destroyed everything. Her voice was faint. I sat where it happened, trying to remember every detail, as if I could somehow go back and change it. Mark felt something inside him crack, a barrier he'd maintained for 6 months. It wasn't just you, he said, his voice breaking. I suggested we split up at the fair, remember? You take Emily to the petting zoo, I'd check out the exhibition hall. We'd cover more ground that way. If I had stayed with you both. You never said that before. Jessica's eyes searched his. You never blamed yourself. Because one of us had to be strong, had to keep functioning. Tears streamed down his face now, months of suppressed guilt and grief pouring out. I thought if I admitted how much I blamed myself, we'd both fall apart completely. Jessica squeezed his hand weakly. All this time I thought you blamed me too. Never, he whispered fiercely. Never, Jess. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of shared guilt and understanding settling between them. It's Christmas morning, Jessica realized suddenly, looking at the clock. Emily will wake up soon. Mrs. Henderson is with her. She'll be fine until we get home. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. I ruined Christmas for her, after everything she's been through. No, Mark said firmly. Christmas isn't about a single day. It's about family, about being together. We'll make it special when you're better. The doctor returned, checking Jessica's temperature again. Much better, he announced. If this continues, you might be able to go home this afternoon, though I'd recommend taking it easy for a few days. By noon, Jessica had recovered enough for discharge. The snow had stopped, leaving a pristine white blanket over the town. As Mark drove them home, Jessica stared out the window, her thoughts clearly still troubled. What if she doesn't want me there? She asked quietly. What if I've broken her trust completely? We rebuild it, Mark said simply. Day by day, that's all we can do. When they pulled into the driveway, Jessica hesitated before getting out of the car. Through the front window, they could see Mrs. Henderson and Emily in the living room, the Christmas tree lights twinkling in the background. I'm scared, Jessica admitted. Me too, but we can't hide from our daughter anymore, either of us. They entered quietly, Mrs. Henderson greeting them with relief, before discreetly gathering her things to leave. Emily stood in the center of the living room, watching Jessica warily. Merry Christmas, Emily, Jessica said softly. I'm sorry I wasn't here this morning. Emily didn't respond, her expression guarded. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Mark noticed something unusual about the living room. Under the Christmas tree, which had stood undecorated and neglected since Mark had half-heartedly erected it days ago, were several clumsily wrapped packages. Handmade paper decorations hung from the lower branches within Emily's reach. Emily, Mark asked gently, did you do this? She nodded, suddenly looking uncertain. Mrs. Henderson helped me find paper. I wrapped the presents myself. She bit her lip. They're not very good. They're beautiful, Jessica breathed, taking in the scene. Did you make the ornaments too? Emily nodded again. The tree was sad without them. Why did you do all this? Mark asked. Emily looked down at her slippered feet, then back up at them with an expression of heartbreaking earnestness. I was trying to make a real Christmas, she said timidly, like in the books that Dad used to read to me. Emily's words hung in the air like delicate ornaments, fragile and precious. Jessica's eyes filled with tears as she took in the scene, her daughter standing before a Christmas tree she'd decorated herself, trying to recreate the holiday magic she remembered from before her world had shattered. Like in the books Dad used to read to me, Emily had said. She remembered. Amid all the trauma and confusion, some part of her still held those memories close. Jessica knelt down slowly, keeping a careful distance. It's beautiful, Emily. You've made a wonderful Christmas. Mark joined them, his voice thick with emotion. Those books are still on your shelf. We could read one together if you'd like. Emily nodded, a tentative smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It wasn't the exuberant grin of the child they'd lost at the fair, but it was genuine. A small light in the darkness they'd been wandering through. The morning unfolded with careful movements, each of them navigating this new territory of cautious hope. Mark made hot chocolate, while Jessica sat on the couch. Emily perched on the opposite end with Mr. Snuggles between them, like a protective barrier. The Christmas tree lights blinked in a steady rhythm, casting colorful shadows across the living room. "I have an idea," Mark said suddenly. "Would it be all right if I invited someone to join us for Christmas dinner?" Emily looked up, curiosity replacing wariness. "Who?" "Robert," Mark answered, watching her reaction closely. "He called yesterday to wish you a Merry Christmas. I thought maybe he'd like to join us." The suggestion surprised Jessica. She knew how conflicted Mark felt about Robert's connection with Emily, how it wounded him when she called the trucker Daddy. Yet here he was, offering to include the man in their most intimate family celebration. Emily's face brightened. "Can he really come?" "If Jessica thinks it's a good idea," Mark said, looking to his wife. Jessica understood the gesture for what it was, not just kindness toward Robert, but acknowledgement of his importance to Emily's recovery. "I think that would be lovely," she said softly. When Robert arrived that afternoon, his large frame seemed out of place among the delicate Christmas decorations. He carried a small, simply wrapped package and a grocery bag. "Didn't know if you'd have cranberry sauce," he explained gruffly, handing the bag to Mark. "Can't have Christmas dinner without it." Emily approached him with more animation than she'd shown in days. "We decorated the tree," she announced, pointing proudly at her handiwork. "Well, would you look at that?" Robert said appreciatively. "Those are some mighty fine decorations." As Mark prepared dinner, Jessica found herself alone in the kitchen with Robert, while Emily showed him her drawings in the living room. "Thank you for coming," she said, meaning it genuinely. "I know it's not easy stepping into someone else's family holiday." Robert shrugged his broad shoulders. "Wasn't doing anything but driving. Besides, that little girl in there deserves a good Christmas after what she's been through." Jessica studied him. This stranger who had found their daughter, who had somehow earned her trust when her own parents couldn't. There was no artifice in him, no hidden agenda, just simple human kindness. "She called you Daddy during therapy," Jessica said quietly. "Mark told me." Robert's weathered face flushed with embarrassment. "I set her straight right away. Last thing I want is to confuse her more." "I know, but I've been thinking about why she did that." Jessica glanced toward the living room where Emily was showing Mark a new drawing. "You were the first person to help her without asking for anything in return. No rules, no threats, no expectations of who she should be. Just safety." Robert nodded slowly. Every child deserves that much. When dinner was ready, they gathered around the table, a tableau so normal and yet so remarkable given the journey that had brought them here. Emily sat between Mark and Robert, with Jessica across from her. The cranberry sauce was passed, along with mashed potatoes and roast chicken. Not the elaborate feast they might have planned in another year, but nourishing and warm. Emily ate more than she had since her return, even accepting a second helping of potatoes. Jessica noticed how she watched the adults' interactions, studying them with cautious curiosity, as if trying to understand this new constellation of relationships. After dinner, they moved to the living room where Emily's clumsily wrapped presents waited. She had repurposed paper grocery bags, decorating them with crayon drawings and inexpert tape. Inside were small treasures, a handmade bookmark for Mark, a clay pinch pot she'd made during therapy for Jessica, and a drawing of a big truck for Robert. "Did I do Christmas right?" she asked quietly after the gifts were opened. "Perfect," Mark assured her, the bookmark already placed in the novel on his nightstand. Jessica held the small, misshapen pot as if it were fine crystal. "It's the most beautiful present I've ever received." As evening approached, Robert prepared to leave, thanking them for the meal and company. Emily watched him gather his coat with visible apprehension. "You're going away?" she asked, the same question she'd posed during his previous visit. "Got to get back on the road tomorrow," he explained gently. "Deliveries don't stop for Christmas." Emily nodded, processing this information with the seriousness that had become characteristic since her return. Then, in a gesture that caught everyone by surprise, she stepped forward and took Jessica's hand in her right and Mark's in her left. Standing united as a small family, she looked up at Robert. "Thank you for coming to our Christmas, my friend." My friend, not Daddy or any other title that might blur the boundaries of her recovering memory. Just a simple, appropriate acknowledgement of his place in her life. Mark and Jessica exchanged a glance over her head, recognizing the significance of the moment. After Robert left with promises to visit when his route brought him through town again, the small family settled into the quiet evening. Emily, exhausted from the day's emotions, fell asleep on the couch between her parents. Mark carried her gently to bed, tucking Mr. Snuggles under her arm. "She called me my friend," Jessica said later as they sat together in the kitchen, mugs of tea warming their hands. "Did you notice? Not the other mommy or the lady, just me." Mark reached across the table for her hand. "It's a start." In the weeks that followed, they established new routines. January brought a fresh blanket of snow and tentative steps forward. Mark returned to teaching part-time, arranging his schedule around Emily's therapy sessions. Jessica, finding purpose in her own recovery, began researching support groups for parents of missing children. "I was thinking," she told Mark one evening, "about starting a group here in town. For parents going through what we did, there's nothing within 50 miles. Mark looked up from his lesson plans, studying her face. "That sounds like a wonderful idea. You'd be good at that." The first meeting was small, just 2 other couples and a single father whose children had been found after brief disappearances. But as Jessica shared their story, she felt something healing within her. The guilt and shame that had consumed her began to transform into something constructive, a way to help others navigate the unimaginable. Emily continued her therapy with Dr. Winters, gradually processing her trauma through play and art. There were still difficult days, nightmares that left her screaming for her parents, moments of confusion when memories collided and tangled. But there were also breakthroughs. The first time Emily called Jessica Mommy again came during breakfast on a snowy February morning. It was whispered, hesitant, almost experimental. "Can I have more orange juice, Mommy?" But the simple word brought tears to Jessica's eyes. "Of course, sweetheart," she managed to reply, turning quickly to the refrigerator to hide her emotion. When she shared the moment with Dr. Winters later that day, the psychologist smiled. "She's testing the water, seeing how it feels to reclaim that relationship. It's a very positive sign." By early spring, the Woods trial was underway, though Emily was spared testifying in person thanks to recorded sessions with Dr. Winters and the overwhelming physical evidence. Jessica attended each day, Mark joining her when he could, both of them determined to see justice served without allowing the proceedings to dominate their healing home life. On a mild April afternoon, Emily ventured into the backyard for the first time since her return, drawn by the sound of robins singing. Jessica watched from the kitchen window as her daughter explored the familiar space anew, touching the swing set tentatively, examining emerging crocuses with serious concentration. When Robert's truck rumbled into their driveway for one of his now regular visits, Emily ran to greet him, wearing her favorite green dress, the same shade but a new garment, the original lost, along with so much else at the fair. The sight of her running, moving with childlike freedom rather than the cautious restraint that had marked her movements for so long, brought a lump to Jessica's throat. Mark joined her at the window, slipping his arm around her waist. Together they watched as Robert showed Emily how to fold a simple paper boat, their heads bent together in concentration. "I was thinking," Mark said quietly, "maybe this summer we could take a trip to the beach. The three of us. Emily's been drawing pictures of the ocean lately." Jessica leaned against him, savoring the warmth of connection that had been rebuilt between them, stronger now for having been tested so severely. "I'd like that." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their daughter laugh as Robert demonstrated how the paper boat could float in a puddle left by melting snow. The sound of her laughter, once so commonplace, now precious beyond measure, drifted through the open window. Jessica tilted her face up to the spring sunshine, feeling its warmth, after the long, cold winter. "You know, for 1 second that day, I thought the cotton candy wasn't worth it. Now I know every sweet moment is worth any price."